The next chair of the Democratic National Committee will have a big job on their hands, leading top-level infrastructure, organizing, fundraising, all for Democrats ahead of 2026 and the 2028 elections. They will also be in charge of shaping that process in 2028, really 2027 for the primaries. So far, two contenders have officially thrown their hats into the race, former Maryland Governor Martin O'Malley and the chair of Minnesota's arm of the Democratic Party, Ken Martin. Ken Martin is currently a DNC vice chair. Now, NBC News has also learned that Wisconsin Democratic Party Chair Ben Wickler is strongly considering a run for the role. Here with us to discuss it all is Elleithee, Executive Director of Georgetown's Institute of Politics and Public Service. I just finished my fellowship there. Also here is Semaphor's politics reporter Dave Weigel. Greetings all.
Good morning, everybody. Mo, first to you. You've worked inside, outside of the DNC. What do you think the party needs to be looking for in its next leader?
Yeah, and just full disclosure, I'm also currently on the DNC's Rules and Bylaws Committee, which is, we actually also govern the process, not just for the nominating process, but for this next chair's election. So we'll be meeting in a couple of weeks to lay out the process for the chair's election. But look, I think the DNC chair has one specific job and then another really important role to play in this situation. One, they got to set up the committee to help win elections. First and foremost, that's the gig. That means raising money. That means setting up infrastructure. That means making sure we've got ground games and strong operations in all the states. That means making sure we take our data and technology operation to the next level. That's the gig, is to just set up the organization so that we're ready to win the next round of elections. But number two, in this case, after we just got beat, the DNC chair can be part of the process and help force the conversation about what direction the party wants to move in moving forward. I want to be clear. It's not like the DNC can wave a magic wand and say, this is who we are, this is what we're going to do, this is our message. There are a lot of other cooks in that kitchen, but they can have a seat at the table to help the party answer the tough questions it needs to answer. And I expect you'll hear some of these candidates talk about that.
So Dave, the interesting thing about all of this is how you kind of, to Mo's point, you set up the game. Mm-hmm. Okay, because I can tell you, as a county, state, and national chairman, you have two specific jobs: raise money, win elections. Right? That's the core. But then there is the directional piece, and I thought Pete Buttigieg put up an interesting warning to panic Democrats. He noted, we cannot be mesmerized by the worst things that we see happening. We will be inclined to react with shock by some things that are done precisely with the intent of shocking us. We need to move very quickly through the shock. That's going to be the hardest part of this, because to Mo's point, in those other kitchens, everybody's in shock, right? And they react out of shock, and they want to do things that are absolutely bat crazy in terms of trying to move the party forward. The chairman has the opportunity to work with the national leadership, the minority leader in the House, the minority leader in the Senate, and other teams to sort of work through that shock. How do you see that process for Democrats, given that there's so many constituencies that need to be tended to? Hurting them through that shock can be difficult.
Yeah, between the lines of what Buttigieg is saying, this is a lot about 2027 and how they pick the next nominee. Yeah. And a conversation a lot of Democrats have had was, Kamala Harris wasn't hurt because of things she did in 2024. She was hurt because of things she did in 2019. When Democrats were running for president, people were very angry about what the Trump administration was doing at every level to immigrants, to LGBTQ people, etc. And they went on TV or they went on forums and said things that would hurt them. Unpopular things, raising your hand when you're asked if the border crossing should be decriminalized. And so I've not heard. I talked to Martin this week. One thing he said is that Fox News is maybe back in the mix. I mean, you remember how Democrats said we're not going to have a debate on Fox News anymore. Right. He said, well, we need to reach out to people we're not familiar with or that don't listen to our message. And he didn't get into this, but how many forums are candidates going to do where they're asked things that might be unpopular? They can have an answer that's not popular with that part of the base, but they can't be in another position where they're promising everything to everybody on video that Republicans can come back and use against them. And that's not the first job of this chairman, but that's the long term. How do you set up the next primary job? How do you protect the candidates a bit? Donald Trump this time, he just wouldn't go to these forums. He wouldn't go to these debates. He wouldn't take an invitation where he might say something that's unpopular in a swing state. So can't protect your candidates from that. How do you make them robust enough where they're not making mistakes?
Well, I mean, let's just be very honest. I'm sorry, but some of this also got to do with who is advising the candidates. Because, okay, if I've been in a debate prep. They tell you to raise your hand. Do not raise your hand. In 2020, Joe Biden's hands was like this, honey. He don't got no hands to raise because why are we raising hands? Okay, we're not in class. You're running to be the president of the United States of America. Perhaps you say, let's not raise hands. I want to say what I need to say. So there is some of that as well. Like the candidates didn't do themselves any favors, I don't think, the last time. When you interviewed Ken Martin and Secretary Buttigieg and Ken Martin, I think, had similar constructs. I interviewed the secretary on Thursday where he made these comments. But when you talked to Ken Martin, we put on the screen, it said, for the first time in history, is what Ken Martin said, the perceptions Americans have of the two major political parties has switched. The majority of Americans believe the Republican Party best represents the interests of the working class and the poor, and the Democratic Party is the party of the wealthy and the elites. That is a deep challenge to our brand. That was in response to the question, why do Republicans do so well in greater Minnesota outside of the Twin Cities and Duluth, and then what do Democrats need to do to be competitive? You got this DNC chairs race, Mo, and it's not just the DNC chair, it's the vice chairs. And some people say, oh, this is inside baseball, but these are the people that are going to help shepherd the primary process we just talked about in 2027, 2028. These are the folks that are going to raise the money. A strong chair is important, but I'm wondering your thoughts as a DNC member, frankly, about the structure. Like, are we going to return to a strong CEO model? Frankly, is that something members would like to see?
Yeah, look, I think members would like to see the DNC actually kind of follow the lead that Stacey Abrams had in Georgia when after she lost her first governor's race. What did she do? She started organizing, like the next day. She started delivering message, not for herself, not for any particular candidate, but for the brand. When I was at the DNC as the comms director back during the 2014 midterms. So
that was a tough midterm.
Tough midterm, right? Post-Romney, pre-Trump. We did these focus groups of swing voters around the country. We gave them a piece of paper and a pencil and said, I'm going to say a word, draw a picture. First word was Republican. The most commonly drawn picture at the time was a dollar sign. And when we asked people why, they said, because they're the party of the rich. They wouldn't say that now. But the most commonly drawn picture for Democrat was a question mark. That's so much worse. They didn't really know what the DNC stood for.
You're 10 years later.
This is the question. This is what
you still got a question mark.
This is what I think a lot of Democrats are hoping that the party can actually help fill that void by answering that question on the ground. All over across the country, in these battleground states, in working class neighborhoods, working class whites, working class blacks, working class Latinos, answering that question mark now before we even know who's going to think about running for president.
So, Dave, I take Mo's point that this job has sort of some actual tasks before. You got to be able to raise money. You got to be able to set up a ground game. You got to be able to set up the infrastructure inside of the committee. I do wonder what your reporting tells you about the likelihood that this turns into a proxy fight about the future of the party, especially given all of the very hot takes we've seen in the wake of Democrats' loss.
That'll depend in part who else runs, because other people have been making calls or have been appealed to run. You mentioned Wickler. Rahm Emanuel is still in Japan, and a lot of state chairs, a lot of progressives in the party do not want him to run. But he's the sort of person who might make part of the argument I was saying, that the party needs to be clearer when it's saying no to some interest group or constituency that might hurt them in a couple of years if they make the wrong promises. The advantage is that they're not as weak as they were 8 years ago when the party was divided over the Bernie-Hillary primary. It was divided over hacks of email that were published, and it didn't have much money. You had very weak state parties, especially in the swing states. They're very strong now. They have the infrastructure that can get out there and win, but not if people have decided 6 months, a year before the election that Democrats are the question mark party, or the party that's not going to do anything, or the party that was responsible for inflation. So I don't think this is going to be like 8 years ago where there was an ideological "what do we stand for" test. It'll be more. It'll be more about how do we protect the candidates? How do we? It's going to be them saying what we stand for. It's going to be these governors who got reelected in swing states who say what we stand for. How does the party create a structure where they're not just being caricatured by Republicans for the craziest things said on social media? Because that's one thing that got even better for Republicans the last 4 years. Not just Trump reaching out to these alternative media podcasts, but Democrats being defined not by the candidates, but by radicals that were not actually running for office. It's really complicated. No one has figured this out, even with the presidency for 4 years, and Joe Biden not doing the things the Republicans were attacking him for. That got much harder, and that's not the chair can set up a structure where the candidates are performing well. That's why I don't think it's going to be like a who's responsible for losing the election fight, because everyone was. There's not a faction that they could blame.
No.
I don't know about Rahm Emanuel. I just want to be on the record. Okay, sure. I think it's crazy. You like Rahm?
Yeah.
Rahm?
Yeah.
Oh, I was about to say.
Guys, you have an hour and 10 minutes more to get on the record with that, so we'll come back to that.